Welcome to episode 192 of the Loane Hockey Podcast, where today we're going to be talking about some standouts in last night's matchup between Edmonton and Minnesota. And we only saw two games last night, which was really interesting. And obviously tonight it's going to be a lot different in terms of how many matchups there are. But it was a really good game from Edmonton. They ended up taking this one 5-3. I thought for they started the season off to a slower start, but now they've really been rolling. They've been so consistent, and they've just been really exciting to watch now. I feel like Edmonton's really climbed up there in terms of being one of the better teams in the league throughout the season right now, and they're certainly playing really effective hockey. So they've been really fun to watch. Yesterday's game was a back and forth game offensively. Like there's offense going on at both ends of the rink, and both teams were creating a lot of offense. And it's so interesting because Minnesota, given that they don't have Brock Faber, they don't have Jared Spurgeon, they don't have Kirill Kaprizov and Jonas Brodin, how guys like Matt Boldy's been the main one to take on a bigger role, and he's been heavily relied upon there. And I feel like he's done a really good job of being able to adapt to that, and kind of has turned into a superstar over the course of the last few weeks with how much he's been relied upon in so many situations without Kaprizov. So Boldy, he had a really, really nice goal last night in this game. It's so exciting to watch. I feel like he's turned into one of the NHL's better power forwards now already, and he's so young. And he was only drafted a few years ago too. And it's so interesting to watch with him because you see his trajectory, how fast has he's really evolved, and it's just really intriguing to watch. And he's been a player who obviously very exciting to watch in terms of his dual threat ability, how he can pull pucks off the wall, how he uses his strength to get to space and leverage open space there. He's just so effective as an all-around player, and he's so fun to watch in that sense. He's so good. And some other standouts in Minnesota sign, obviously, Matt Zuccarello is really good, and he's been relied upon. And then you get guys like Joel Eriksson and Ryan Hartman are going to be relied upon more too, and Matt Zuccarello. It's so interesting with the Minnesota because you have Kaprizov, you have Boldy, you have Zuccarello, but after that kind of drops off in terms of talent a little bit more and a little bit faster. So it's really interesting to see Minnesota's offense there. And anyway, with Zuccarello, he's a really good playmaker, really good pass first player, skilled on the wing, skilled driving pace, and being able to push the pace going up ice. And he can push pace moving north, or he can push it moving laterally as well. He's so good at being able to do both, and he can add some deception with his feet. So he's really skilled with his feet and how he's able to maneuver there. And then Joel Eriksson is just a really, really underrated two-way center in the league. I feel like when it comes to him, he's really good as a shutdown center. I would say I notice him more defensively than I do offensively because of his ability to shut plays down, play in so many key situations defensively, be a reliable player defensively, and also be a guy who can be a positional aware center in so many aspects of the defensive zone, which sometimes centers have a hard time doing, but he's really adept at doing it. He's one of the better players in the NHL, especially when it comes to centers, at being able to shut plays down and do it on a consistent basis and play other teams' top line. So, and just so underrated, criminally underrated when it comes to his defensive play. And Marco Rossi is another one I felt like I've really noticed him a lot this season. I feel like every time I've watched Minnesota, I've noticed Rossi a lot more than many other players. It's so weird because you wouldn't necessarily gravitate to Rossi right away. You'd think when you think Minnesota offensively, you think of Kaprizov, you think of Zuccarello, but the main one is Kaprizov. Like you don't really think about too much else other than Kaprizov up front. So with Rossi, he's obviously turned into a player who's been really good offensively, and that's what they needed out of him, especially him being a top 10 pick. They were looking for him to make that next step. And it felt like there's a point around last year or so where it almost felt really close, or not last year, maybe 2 years ago, because last year he was in his rookie year. So that was probably 2 years ago. It felt like there was a point 2 years ago where it felt like Rossi was going to get traded at some point, and it's so interesting to see how this situation's played out now, because he's been playing consistent NHL minutes. He's been playing really well and has just been really good in many different situations for them too. And he's really interesting to watch because he's a player where it's like you don't really know the offensive ceiling of him, but at the same time, you know he's a at least the top nine center on this team. Like he can't go further down than the top three lines based on his skill and based on the habits that he has ingrained in his game. So that's intriguing when talking about him. And I'm going to talk about one more player who's slightly unorthodox on their decor, and you wouldn't really talk about him otherwise. Declan Chisholm. I believe I said that right. I actually noticed his game yesterday a lot. I felt like his puck movement was noticeable, his physicality was noticeable. He's more of that old school, rugged style defenseman who I bet analytically speaking, you don't necessarily notice him a ton, but in terms of the raw eye test, obviously a physical defenseman plays to his size, plays sturdy in both directions, moving north and south when it comes to his footwork, and not necessarily offensively reliable, and defensively a little bit of mistakes on times and on occasion when it came to man-on-man coverage. But I felt like overall he was steady, he was reliable, and he was able to play a top four role for them. And obviously, with the guys that they have out on their decor, like it's so tough for Minnesota to be able to replace those guys, but having Chisholm and having him play a consistent role and a really good role in the time being has been awesome to see for him and the growth of his game in the meantime. And then Edmonton side, Connor McDavid, who else, right? I feel like every game there's something to talk about with him. It's so weird because he's already got over 1,000 career points. He's already 28 and he's only 28. And there's still something you could talk about him differently every single game when you watch him. I feel like that's just a testament to how skilled he is and how easy he makes the game look. And even though it's not easy at all, he just makes it look like it's so easy. It's like when you're playing NHL video games on rookie mode. It's basically what Connor McDavid does. But anyway, he had three he had 3 points and he had 2 goals and 1 assist. I felt like I was just noticing him everywhere in transition, offensively, entries, like there's so many different elements to his game that were so linked together offensively for him, and it felt like it allowed him to be consistent and be so effective in many different situations. And then Brian Nugent Hopkins with 2 points, a goal and an assist each, and I always like his game. He is a guy who I would say has, over the course of time, and even though he's drafted as a premier skill type centerman when he was drafted first overall over a decade ago, I feel like he's a really evolved more over the course of time to be more of a shutdown player. Because when you have a guy like McDavid down the middle, you have Draisaitl down the middle, who can be played down the middle and on the wing. Those are guys you're not going to rely upon them defensively. So I feel like Nugent Hopkins is kind of adapted to more of an offensive style role because especially being a center, it's really important, especially for veterans in the league, to be able to play a defensive role when need be. And for a team like Edmonton that doesn't necessarily have how should I say this? A ton of depth outside of those trio up front, where you have obviously McDavid and Draisaitl, and then Nugent Hopkins, I would say is the other one in there who's slightly in that mix. I would say McDavid and Draisaitl are kind of on another tier compared to Nugent Hopkins, but still, Nugent Hopkins is kind of in that realm a little bit. And I feel like it's just forced him to play a little bit more of a shutdown role because if McDavid can't do it, someone's going to have to do it, especially at the center position. Like there's no other option. So I felt like that was really good to see. And I feel like I've noticed his defensive positioning get better over the course of time, especially in recent years. I would say over the last half decade or so, like his D zone positioning, his attention to detail in the D zone, how he's using his stick, how he's positioning his eyes so he can maintain his vision over the play in the D zone. Like a lot of different situations where I feel like I've noticed them. And then a couple other guys, I feel like Zach Hyman, we could talk about every other game too. Leon Draisaitl, we could talk about all the time. But I love talking about this guy is Evan Bouchard. I always notice his game on a regular basis all the time. And he's so unique to watch. He is kind of like Adam Fox. I feel like he's very, very similar to Adam Fox in a sense where a lot of his reads are based on timing more than anything. And that really allows him to be able to control space and control situations to his advantage. And he's not necessarily a player that's super flashy or super mobile with his feet or anything like that, but he gets a lot of his situations and reads right when it comes to anticipation and timing with his brain. Like he's so skilled with his hockey sense, his anticipation, being proactive, understanding how to make the right play at the right moment, and what he wants to do next with the puck is just it's such an underrated skill when it comes to hockey sense. And he does it effortlessly. And I noticed it at 5-on-5, I noticed it on the power play, I noticed in D zone, breakouts, exits, entries, whatever. And he's always noticeable. So he's always super skilled when it comes to that. Like I said, I really believe if there's any defenseman who's close to Adam Fox, and there's not many that are in this league, it's Evan Bouchard right now. Just because of the they're two guys who are really skilled with their brain, not necessarily super skilled with their feet per se, but super skilled with their brain and how they anticipate and how they're able to understand patterns there. So some standouts throughout this game as well.